Welcome to the Center for Creative Leadership webinar, Leading Remote Teams When the Stakes Are High. It's presented by Rich Tallman and Erica Reynolds of the Center for Creative Leadership, also known as CCL. We are so glad you could join us today. My name is Tracy Dobbins, and I'll serve as your CCL webinar moderator for today's session. At CCL, our sole focus is leadership development, education, and research. With new emphasis on telecommuting comes a new need for leading remote teams. We thank you for joining this webinar today to learn best practices for virtual leadership. I'm pleased to have with us today Rich Tallman and Erica Reynolds. Rich and Erica are both leadership solution partners at the Center for Creative Leadership and are based out of our San Diego office. Welcome, Rich and Erica. And I'll now turn the session over to Rich.
Thank you, Tracy. I'm excited to be here to share CCL's approach to leading remote teams when the stakes are high. High stakes can occur during times of crisis and disruption, and obviously the current state of affairs dealing with COVID-19 is an example of just that.
Yes, I definitely agree, Rich. So as the world has had to maneuver through uncharted territory, there's been a band of this global workforce. We've had to set up shop and working from home. So with a new emphasis on telecommuting, teams need a strategy for thinking differently, communicating digitally, and just making sure people feel included and connected in order to effectively manage their people and projects remotely.
Thanks, Erica. So with that in mind, we're going to turn it over to all of you right now and ask you a question. And the question is, on a scale of 1 through 5, 1 being not effective, 5 being very effective, how would you self-rate your own effectiveness at leading teams? If you would type a number from 1 through 5 in with your self-rating in the chat box. Oh, all kinds of, lots of 3s, some 4s up. I see a 5 here, a lot of 4s, 5s, a couple of 2s. Lots of 3s. Seems like a lot of folks are saying themselves right kind of in the middle of things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think what we're going to do is investigate where we're going next with this, and I'm going to hand the baton over to Erica as she takes us through what you can expect to gain in today's webinar.
All right. I see people from all over chiming in. That's great. Hi, Gilbert from Costa Rica. So thank you, Rich. I'm going to grab the baton, and I'm ready to take us through today's learning outcomes. So in the webinar today, you can expect to help increase effectiveness as a leader and or a member of a virtual team, identify research-based best practices that contribute to an optimal virtual environment, sustain business continuity even in the midst of disruption, which is what we're experiencing now. Learn and practice the mindsets, the skill sets, and the tools for effective virtual leadership. And then also quickly build a sense of team virtually in times of crisis like this. So if we have time permitting at the end, we're going to close this time together with a Q&A or just sharing some insight. So without further delay, let's begin our journey together to leading remote teams when the stakes are high.
So let's start with the big question of why. Why remote teamwork is very challenging. CCL has been conducting research to help our clients lead during high stress and disruptive situations like the one we find ourselves in currently. What we've learned working with clients around the world is that being in disruptive times makes everything feel like the stakes are higher. Leading remote teams in times of uncertainty definitely falls into the bucket of high stakes. So let's start by talking about why remote teamwork can be challenging. Most people who have worked remotely can attest that while virtual teamwork has its pros, it can also have lots of cons. What we found from our research is that most virtual teams fail for the following reasons. Failing to recognize that working at a distance presents new challenges and requires new mindsets and skill sets. Most of us take our virtual teams and we mimic our face-to-face solutions, which often overlook the complexity of the virtual teamwork. People are in different places, different time zones. We have technology, it works, it doesn't work. And lastly, there's very little training that's been available to us to actually think about how you do virtual teams.
Yeah, very good, Rich. And because of this lack of training, and then these certain challenges can arise. And so here on the slide, you'll see just some common challenges for team members. So feeling disconnected, like you're not part of the team, a lack of feedback or growth opportunities, right? How do you develop when you're virtual? Lack of trust in the technology itself, or perhaps just misunderstanding it, right? Or there could be conflict, lack of trust with each other, and then just ultimately not having enough information.
And while our team members are facing all of these challenges, as leaders, we definitely have to play both roles and also have the additional set of challenges that we're experiencing. So one of our clients, an old client of mine that I was recently in touch with, gave me a great quote and said, you know, in the best of times, I've always needed help with this. That's why I worked with you over the years. But now I find that I'm having to do hand-holding. I'm having to get people more information, be in touch with them more. I can't see them. I'm dealing with all of their challenges plus mine. And obviously, I still struggle with it.
Yeah, that's a good example. So now I'm going to turn it over to our participants in the chat. So take a look at some of these challenges that could come up in the box, and I want you to type in which of these challenges have you been experiencing while working and leading a remote team during this pandemic. Let's see what you have here. I see one that says not being able to measure productivity, okay. Lack of feedback. Right. Okay. Margie, technology. Okay. Yeah. Challenges with technology is coming out a lot. Lack of trust, coaching. Yeah. So exactly. We can see that misunderstanding. Thank you, Ruby, Colleen. Yeah. Very good, Jason. So as we can see that during these times, we're all going through it, right? And leading remote teams in times of disruption, especially, just adds that extra layer of making this a challenging situation. Thank you, guys.
So as you've all said, you recognize all of these, the reason that most of our teams are having and struggling with things being virtual. We feel like we're failing, but we need to consider how we need to lead differently when we're working remotely as opposed to when we lead in the office. Some of these common mistakes are on the slide right here, and I want to emphasize two particularly, the bottom two. Virtual teams take a lot more time to invest in relationships, and most likely because of what's going on right now, we tend to dive right into the task. And there's a reason for that. People are nervous right now, people are scared and concerned. Basically, the economies seem like they're in shambles. The other is that our teams, and not just virtual teams, but regular co-located teams, face problems that they seem to be problems, but are actually more about polarities. And polarities are tensions that have to be managed. That's one of the things that we're going to be focusing on. So with all of this, there's got to be some benefit to virtual work. And so as you think about what's out there, there are some great benefits to employers, and I've got a few listed up here. You know, employees are happier. They tend to like to be trusted more. They tend to like the flexibility. Obviously, the benefits to employees are thinking about work-life balance, and working at home makes things easier and more flexible for them. And then obviously there's some environmental benefits as well. Most of you have probably seen some of the pictures, satellite images that show smog and pollution being down quite a bit, gas prices down, and so forth. So there are lots of different things here as well that we want to pay attention to. And part of this is also thinking a little differently about it. I'm not sure how many of you have heard of the company Automatic. A couple of their offerings are Tumblr and WordPress. Their CEO, Matt Mullenweg, made a conscious choice to talk about the term distributed work versus remote. Automatic has 1,180 people. They call them automaticians, and they are in 75 countries. And the difference for them is that they've started to think about distributed versus remote because they want everybody to have a sense that there isn't one central place, but that they're all feeling very connected with each other as opposed to being left out because they're not in the hub area.
Yeah, good example. So while we know that there are challenges, as we've said, to virtual teamwork, it's the fastest growing work structure across the globe. So it's something we're going to, we want to attempt to do better at, right, which is why you're here. Okay, we'll go on to the next, So our research shows that working virtually, there's a steady incline to having a competitive advantage. And so in 2016, 85% of teams reported that effective virtual teamwork is critical for their business success. Did you hear me? 85%, and this was in 2016. So now we're in 2020, and businesses globally are scrambling to maintain normal business operations and requiring employees to work at home because of the current COVID-19 pandemic. So extra, is this the new normal? As you can see here at the bottom of the slide, there's these headlines. Yeah, this is going to be more of the new normal.
That's right, Erica, and certainly, at least for the not so foreseeable future. And it's imperative that we understand what makes a virtual team successful. So one of the things I'm going to be asking you to think about during the time that we have together is what team or situation has brought you to us today? And keep asking yourself the question, how does this apply to that team or that situation? So from CCL's research on virtual teams, success requires the things that you're seeing up here: trust, proactivity, more enforced interactions. There's lots of more here. And don't get me wrong, these are all important for co-located teams as well, but critically important for virtual teams. And one of our partner organizations is a financial services organization. They've been doing lots of work over the last few years on trust and accountability in teams. And one of the things that they're having to deal with right now is the fact that every region has its own requirements going forward. They have requirements around stay-at-home orders. They have requirements around government regulations because they're financial services. And so they're having to navigate the new normal, or the now normal, as one person called it, with all these government regulations. And they're glad that they actually started doing some additional work prior to this because it makes some of this easier. And it's still a challenge. They're having to go back to square one. So what we're going to be doing with you over this period of time is giving you some ways to think about how you approach your work. And we're going to really focus on mindset, skill set, and tool set. So we're going to have you focus on your mindset. How is that helping you, and how is that hindering you with your team? How to develop some skills around looking at things a little differently and doing things differently, and finding and utilizing the right tools. So to start, one of the things we've got to do is evolve our mindsets. And so one of the things to think about here is that leading teams and technology and virtual teams are not necessarily the same thing, that there's lots of back and forth that technology and people are not just compatible, but they're integral to understand how both work together, particularly as you think about how many of you are talking about technology issues working remotely. Technology is a part, it's one of the tools we need to be able to use and leverage more. It's about interaction. Collaboration is not just fixed in time and space anymore, it happens and has to happen in limitless ways. And my personal favorite, because I'm an old school kind of person, that face-to-face interaction is crucial. And I'm having to learn that to be a lot more flexible around it. So here's what we'd like you to do. We'd like you to go back into the chat response and think about how do you need to think differently about leading remote teams.
Let's see what we have here, yeah. I see Tim says, always get dressed when working from home for more reasons than one, right? Just for yourself, but also you don't want to stand up and have your boxers or any kind of yoga pants on, right? Be willing to turn your camera on, structure during the day. Very good. These are great. Thank you, Denise. Yeah. Or at least consistency is key when it comes around to, yes, leading the team. Absolutely. So these are great. And they take us into our next key learnings in order to do just this, give us some tips and encourage us on how to do this effectively. Because I did see some comments earlier, and you're right. We're in a different time. It's not regular remote work right now. So let's just, learn this together. So we've seen the challenges, we've seen the benefits and reasons why virtual leadership is important. But this is now, we're going to talk about the how. How do we build and lead vibrant, effective virtual teams? Working virtually requires a shift, right, to a new way of thinking and a new way of doing work together. And our research shows that success requires 3 keys to doing things differently in order to maximize your team effectiveness. So it's polarity thinking, number 2 is inclusion, and number 3, communication and structure. So we're going to walk through what each one of these are and what you can do to manage these effectively. And the first one we're going to go through is called polarity thinking.
So polarity thinking is a mindset, and it's the ability to recognize and the capacity to hold 2 opposing ideas, values, competencies, or strategic outcomes in your mind and get the best from both. And that's quite a mouthful. More and more work being done here. So what I'm going to ask you to do is we're going to play with this a little bit. I'm going to ask you to supplement your initial view with some alternate views. And I'm going to advance and show you an image.
All right, so let's have some fun. Take a look at this picture and type into the chat the first thing that you see. What's the first thing you see here in this photo? Okay. Ooh, I see some interesting, there's some really creative sites here. All right, so let's take a look at what this is. Some of you say that you see a man playing a horn. So let's go to that right here, right? And some, right, and I also saw a bear, but we'll dive into some of those later. And then we can go to the next, let's see. Some say that you may have seen a woman, right, a face of some sort. And then I see some saying both, but I'm still on the bear. I have to play around with that and look at that a little more and see where the bear is. So, okay, that was fun. Let's take a look at this one next and see. Type into the chat what you see. All right, I see a duck. I see a rabbit. Right. You know, this one was a little tough for me. Is right. It's a duck, and it can be a rabbit here. So I don't know if you guys saw earlier today, but it's Archie's birthday, Prince Harry and Meghan's son. And so she actually read a book today that had this similar photo where is it a rabbit or it's a duck, and it's all about your perspective. So the timing is perfect. But that's indeed what polarity is. They're both actually there, and you have to be able to look and manage and deal with both. Thank you. That was fun. So when we think about polarity thinking, this is a mindset shift from thinking either or to thinking both and, right? They both exist. Polarity thinking, it's a lens that we can use to help handle complexity and contradiction. So we're in an ever-changing world today, and in order to be successful in this environment, organizations and teams need to learn how to work with what seems to be contradictory perspectives and views. It's no longer right or wrong. It's just no longer black and white. It just depends. It just depends. So a common polarity in virtual teams is a focus on the task and a focus on the relationships among the team members. So consider what happens if we only focus on the task to the exclusion of the relationship, right? You know, it's likely that people will become disengaged. And then what if we only focused on the relationship to the exclusion of getting our tasks done? We will not provide results. So as you can see, they're both important, and we need to dedicate our focus and our energy to each one, to both. So then the question becomes, how can we do both? Both and thinking can initially feel counterintuitive, and it's going to take practice and patience. But the trick isn't solving a polarity. The trick is recognizing the polarity for what it is and then managing that effectively. It's more of a harmonious process.
So there's got to be some benefit to all that, because as Erica was just talking about, it's a fairly complicated process, and many of you, it sounds like, already know this process and know that it takes some effort. One of the things that we have done some work around is looking at 141 teams across the globe, and what we found is that all of them saw higher levels in everything that you see here, from performance all the way down to informal learning. And so their outcomes are pretty crucial. But what does that actually play out to?
Right. So what are actually the benefits of polarity thinking? Do you know that teams that deliberately focus on their critical team polarities multiple times, they improve their outcomes more? This is often by over 50%. 50%.
So the question might be, how do you know if your team is actually hitting a polarity? And so some of you already know this. You find that your discussions around particular topics, there's a constant, persistent tension around it. There are recurring or reoccurring chronic issues that seem like they never get resolved. Within those challenges, there are some contradictory mixed messages. And sometimes there's strong resistance to change. So let me share with you one of our clients, an 11-year relationship, is constantly going back and dealing with the tension between global processes and local autonomy and local variation. And so we've been with them through three of these iterations, and we're now in the middle. And the challenge is when you hear your organization saying, well, we've done that in the past, it didn't work. What you've done in the past actually worked to a certain point, but then conditions somewhat changed or you hit the limits. And so those are the contradictory messages. And the resistance is that people see it as a problem to solve as opposed to a tension to manage. And the role of the leader is to help explore those with the discussions in the team and help groups to understand how you go about bringing those tensions out versus suppressing them. So there are lots of polarities that we encounter every day. All of them are important, but we know that there are 4 that you see here that, according to our colleague Jean Leslie's research, are important for all teams to look at, co-located as well, but particularly important for virtual teams. So we've talked, Erica mentioned relationship and task orientation. I'm not going to address that one, and I'm going to look at the other three. So advocacy and inquiry. Let's start with that. It's important that team members challenge openly, debate furiously, and then decide and act as one. So we're talking about diversity of thought here, but we want to start with a unified team that is able to figure out how they get those tensions out and those differences of opinion, but then come around and can actually operate as a uniform or unified group. Informal and formal communications. Groups that only use formal communications aren't as effective as those that use both. IMing, texting leads to understanding relationship building when you aren't co-located. So in all of our Zoom meetings now, we can watch people texting each other back and forth. Sometimes it can be or seem annoying. A lot of times what it does is helps to reveal people's thinking about what they're hearing and how they're reacting to it. Lastly, verify and trust. It's important to make sure that the work gets done, and people need the space to be able to do it. They also need to know that you do trust them, and so it's going to require more effort on the part of the leader to engage in all of that. So what I'd like to do is, as you think of these polarities.
Yeah, so thank you. As you think about this, I want you to put in the chat, which polarity do you think is most crucial for you with your team? I already see some answers coming in. They were ready. So we have A, relationship and task orientation, B, advocacy and inquiry, C, informal and formal communication, D, to trust and verify. Lots of A's, lots of relationship and task. And so I saw a question earlier as well, is why is this important when it comes to remote work? This is important in leadership in general, but when you're working remotely, we have to be really mindful of the polarities, especially in times like this of crises where we're really trying to focus to make sure we're getting the work done and we're not worrying about the relationship with the people or what they're going through, or that I saw comments earlier, challenges with work-life balance, which should be more harmonious at this time because balance is going to be hard. So in context of remote work, these things are even more crucial.
Yeah. It's interesting, too, how many people, Erica, are saying A and D. I like Heather as A, B, C, D, and D, all of them. Got your work cut out for you.
All of the above, right? Okay.
Yeah. So thank you for all that. It's interesting to look at this information. And we're now going to go to our second element, which is inclusion. Second practice, inclusion, it's about belonging and creating a shared belief held by members of the team that it's safe for interpersonal risk-taking. When members of the team are feeling included, their ability to problem solve is greater. They tend to be more engaged, more likely to stay within the organization, give feedback, more likely to just kind of show up and be themselves. So when you experience these things, obviously you feel valued, there's lots more trust that goes on, and you bring your full self. And if you're familiar at all with the Google work on Project Aristotle, one of the things that they talk about as a key determinant for successful teams is psychological safety. Psychological safety is really crucial in teams, because what it means is we can get into arguments, we can say whatever we need to say, we can get down and dirty, and the reality is at the end of it, we come out on the other side. I have an old colleague, friend, who said that until you've been in conflict with somebody, you don't really have a relationship with them.
That's good. That's a good one. Yeah. So I see Jane said here, yeah, that's psychological safety. She was ahead of you there, Rich. We have some smart ones here. Exactly. So we know that inclusion is about a sense of belonging and safety with others, right? But while there are these benefits, and if there are so many benefits to having an inclusive team, then what's getting in the way of that happening all the time? It's like, what is it? I know it's easier said than done. Maybe it takes longer to know when an individual needs to feel included. We have to take time to get to know them. All of these barriers, right, that could get in the way of getting this done. So many of these can be considered costs of inclusion, right? And other barriers could be trying to include some individuals might make others feel excluded, or different beliefs about what inclusion really means, different perspectives around who is worth including and who isn't. Recognizing that inclusion is never a one-size-fits-all strategy is going to be key here. You can't enact a blanket policy for an entire team and expect everyone to feel included by it. So how do you act and behave in a way that's inclusive despite all of this? The key here is going to be to find out what the members of your team need. But let's take a look at what this looks like for us on an individual level. So I'd like for you to briefly think about what kinds of things make you feel included face-to-face. So think about that in your mind when you're face-to-face with someone. Now, I see respect, regular communication, great, wonderful, Georgianne, thank you. So now I want you to place in the chat virtually, right? I mean, what you need to feel included virtually. Place that in the chat, and let's see what you have. Eye contact, yeah, even through the screen, right? Body language, listening, being asked questions, frequent check-ins. Thank you, Lisa, Pablo. Good one, Claudette. Richard, thank you so much. So all of those, it's the same thing kind of that we need in person, but with virtually, it's going to be more important. And I want to use an example here. Think about so I think for myself, and being included is big for me. I want to feel like I'm included, right? But have you guys had the experience of feeling virtually ignored? Do you know what that is? So you're there on your Zoom screen and you see everyone in the meeting, and it's like their little boxes are lighting up and yours is just not because they're talking to each other. I see yes from a lot of people. So Harding's had to deal with this too, and Alfred, thank you. And you're just sitting there and they're glowing like sunshine as their squares are lighting up, and it feels awkward. And so not only is this awkward face-to-face, but you're virtually, it's like you're outside of yourself watching yourself be ignored and not in the situation. So just something I wanted to share. We all have it, but it's important to know what makes you feel included virtually too. Thank you.
So thanks, Erica. That was a great example. And so it leads us into how do we lead inclusively as part of our skill set. And so there are two buckets that we want to look at here. First is leading inward, and that's your own abilities to look at yourself, your own ability to think about things, and then also leading outward as a result. So we're going to start with leading inward, because we know that leadership is an inside-out process. Until I do my own internal work to better include, it's pretty superficial to invite others to do that work as part of a collective effort. Leading inclusively requires me to examine ways in which I have acted inclusively or exclusively within my team roles and beyond. So an example that I had is some years ago I stepped out of a portfolio role that I had directing one of our parts of our portfolio. And over the transition to 3 or 4 months, I was included in meetings. I would reach out, people would reach out to me, and then suddenly it stopped. And I can remember a decision being made, and my first thought was, wow, I wouldn't have done that. And 2, nobody even asked me about that. And I was more than a little miffed. And so I had to get beyond and do some thinking and be curious about what was going on, what was my reaction. I had to look at my own role about it. And then I had to have the courage to challenge some of my own assumptions and also to be able to go back and share some thoughts that I had with that group. So what I'd like to do is just ask you to think just for a moment. This is not a chat thing. When you felt excluded in your own life, what happened? What led to that moment? And where do you think it went wrong?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good contemplation. So, too much ego, too humble, says Heidi. Thanks. Yeah, so let's look at leading outwardly. So leading outwardly, these are the actions of actually creating an environment in which employees have the opportunity to contribute to their own sense of belonging, okay? So accountability is one. You hold team members responsible for their behaviors, their development, and their work processes. Ownership. You guide team members to solve their own problems and make their own decisions. And then allyship. This is where you actively support people from underrepresented groups. And so, according to CCL research findings, these are ways that virtual teams can help to feel more connected. I'll just go through a couple of these. You want to prioritize collaboration tools, detailing which tools will be used for which purposes. You want to also provide extra organizational support and maybe formalize team norms. This is how we're going to interact with each other. Kind of think along those terms. Honor boundaries of personal life and professional life. That's going to be really important right now because they all just kind of bleed together. I saw someone earlier said work-life integration. I think that's a perfect way to describe what we're going to right now. It's just all integrated, always so, but more so now. And then finally, protect your members from burnout. And we have some examples of that a little bit later with the Zoom burnout. I know Zoom's a verb now, so. And so we want to think about now, how do we build effective virtual teams? And we're going to go into our final third practice of communication and structure.
So as we start, we're going to start with the mindset of virtuality. Some of you may have seen this word. It's starting to be bandied about. And it's the mindset of viewing technology as an opportunity to communicate and help teams feel less virtual. So working virtually requires both a very different view of things. It requires us thinking about how do we minimize the fact that people feel virtual. In a sense, what we want is for them to be feeling as if they are not separated at all. And so virtuality is to think about how you use the technology to actually enhance your communication and enhance the ability to feel like we are together, whether it is the Zoom meetings, which I think, as I see up here from a couple of folks, Zoom fatigue. I've heard zoomed out over the last few weeks. Who knew that we were going to get so tired of it so quickly? So the world enters a new virtual reality, and so we need to think about virtuality as a way to make us closer to each other.
Yeah. So technology should be leveraged for easy access and use, right? We want to look for tools that enable joint editing of documents. There are many ways of meeting and teaming that are highly technology dependent, right? And so the more technical and less face-to-face time we spend, the more critical it is that we incorporate practices to actually engage our team members in activity where we can get to know each other beyond the parameters of whatever it is we're doing at the time, right, the task at hand. So it's important to use more information-rich, synchronous technology, like face-to-face video conferencing, in order to coordinate and execute team processes that reduce virtuality while increasing the connection between the people. Now, it's also important to remember time zones right, as physical distance can lead to long hours and burnout. We're in a global organization, and long hours and multiple time zones is the norm for us. And so we're burned out and, again, zoomed out, but, you know, it's a part of the business, so being mindful about that. And you also want to create a structure and norms for the group. That's going to be really helpful as well.
So Erica mentioned rich formats for technology. So the phone calls, the emails, the text, the chat, the instant messaging, all involve sort of more voice-to-voice or words or one-dimensional. There's video messaging, webinars, social media. All the things that we need to think about have to be appropriate to the situation.
Yeah, so let's take a look at what we could use and when that would be appropriate to use that. So the phone, I'll just do a couple of each. This is interacting, this is real time, when there's a give and take needed, when you maybe need to address effectiveness and functioning, complex problem solving, definitely when there's interpersonal issues, you want to pick up the phone. And so video conferencing is going to be all of that, in addition to interaction that requires visual social cues. I saw someone earlier in their chat said, what about body language, you know, eye contact? So that's where video conferencing is going to come in on those kind of more important or deeper interpersonal conversations. Also when you're doing feedback and coaching, which would fit under that. And then how about instant messaging? I don't know how often you guys use this, but it's really helpful. It helps, again, with that give and take, real time, one-to-one, or if you just need to send something to a bunch of people, kind of like we're doing with the chat here, frequent interactions throughout the workday. And how about knowing that someone is there to support, just a sense of co-presence. Sometimes that's needed in the virtual time because I can't see you up in the office, you know, so just knowing you're there, I could send a chat and get an answer back quickly.
So let's talk about some structure for some of your meetings. So a number of things here, and I'm going to start by looking at some of these are about mindset as a place to start. So confirming that team members have the solid foundation of how they're going to operate, being ready to lead the meeting, which is a bit of mindset that you are the leader and you need to be ready to jump into whatever that looks like. Encouraging interaction from everyone. Some of these are skill sets, like looking for the right tools for things, like being managing the time and like wrapping the meeting up so that team members know what's expected when, and some of them are basically tool set types of things, like the best web tools, creating and sending out agendas, and so forth.
Right. So let's get into some watch out. So this blends into what we talked about a little bit earlier. What, you know, technology doesn't consistently work. That's going to be an issue. Or not focused too often. Talking heads, time zones, meetings. Same people keep talking. The same squares keep lighting up there, right? Technophobia, afraid to use it, the technology. So how about you, Rich? I know Rich and I have had some conversations about our challenges with this, and we were on a call and we couldn't get our screens to pop up, right, to see each other's our cameras, to see each other's faces.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and actually, both of us at that point had been in so many Zoom meetings that we actually liked the idea of not seeing each other and not getting distracted by looking at faces or figuring out how do I hide my self view, which no matter how many times I've been on there, I still have a hard time finding out how do I hide it. A few of you have said, I'm noticing in the chat too, that for these things, virtual meetings, having somebody to actually do some moderating, rotating things around, making sure that people are doing different things and sort of, you know, shaking it up a little bit.
Shaking it up. I like that one. All right. So as effective leaders of virtual teams, right, because we're all going to be more effective, and after everything you've heard today, what outcomes can we expect to see from this? So we're going to help you a little bit with this with a framework.
So, all of this should actually result in the following things. And the center has really looked at this over the years. And we have a fairly simple definition around leadership, and that the outcomes are simply that we are all together in this. We agree on the goal, what we're trying to achieve. We're facing the same direction. And so direction is really important. Because we agree on the direction, we are also facing in the same direction, and then understanding that our roles and responsibilities, and they were coordinating between all of us to make sure that we're effectively working together. And lastly, that people are committed. Everyone is equally committed to the success of the group, even over their own individual success.
So, and I just had to contemplate that one, because being committed to the group over individual success, I think that's something that we can all make sure we keep in forward mind. But the process of creating DAC with groups, geographically, organizationally, or time dispersed, mutually dependent team members brought together through technologies to work on shared objectives, this is our definition of virtual leadership and what it is. So now.
All right. So we've talked a lot over the last 45 or so minutes, and we've touched on needed mindsets, skill sets, tool sets, the concept of polarities, inclusion, and then communications and structure. And so what we'd like you to do is in the chat, share what you might commit to as a leader of a remote team to more effectively lead through high-stakes times. And this may be something that to amp up, or something to do less of, or something even to think about.
Yeah, these are great. Include more comments from people, include technology, connect, be more curious. That's an excellent one. Thank you for that. Good one, Jessica, Greg, Claudette. Do something fun up front, like an icebreaker. I like that. These are great. And inclusive practices. Very good.
Yeah, I really like some of these as well. And there are many things that you can do virtually that you might have thought that you weren't able to do from an icebreaker and team building perspective.
I agree totally.
So, to that point, we're going to, before we close out for questions, want to share with you a couple of additional resources, and you can find all of these at www.ccl.org, particularly some of our live online programs. I know my favorite is going to be a little bit more on direction, alignment, and commitment, as well as learning with agility. Erica, do you have a favorite?
I do. I like learning with agility, but better conversations every day. This one is going to be a must-have to increase that communication muscle and communicate effectively. I love that one.
Perfect. And lastly, I mentioned Automatic and Matt Mullenweg, and so he has a TED Talk on the future of work, and all you have to do is Google Automatic and TED Talk, and you'll find him. So I'm going to turn it over to Tracy, who's going to moderate some questions.
Yes, thank you. We do have some few questions coming in. Please just use the chat feature and direct it to all participants if you'd like to submit some of those. We have a question from David. Can we truly replace the advantages of management on the ground versus face-to-face? Or management on the ground face-to-face, can you replace that?
Ooh. That's a very interesting question, because I mentioned to you that I'm a bit old school, and so face-to-face is so crucial to me. And honestly, I struggle with this one, but I also am trying to adopt my own perspective of asking to be curious, because it could be that I'm simply so used to it the way I am. I've talked to my children who are all millennials, and they often will agree with me, but they'll often challenge me about it as well. So maybe for me, it's that mindset. Eric, I don't know, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's good. I think it can be as effective. It just also depends on how it's approached. So and it also depends on your team, right? Because everybody's not a one-stop shop or one-size-fits-all. If you do have team members who are actually more, extroverted and like more interaction, and, that maybe remote work will never be, leading remotely will never be as effective, or the connection won't ever be enough. But what you can do, again, is just try to focus on building that relationship piece, having conversations like coffee chat where you're not talking about work, checking in different ways on phone. I think there are ways to be as effective without the face-to-face pieces. We're going to have to try to be anyway, right? So, and let's keep in mind there are companies that have been doing this for quite some time. So I do believe it just may take a little bit more effort to understand the needs.
Yeah, agreed.
Great. And the next question we have, do you have some tips for, virtual team building? Any recommendations there? Any resources?
Yeah, so that's great. It's kind of what I just, spoke on, right? We have like virtual happy hours or virtual coffee chats on the Zoom or WebEx or things of that nature. I saw one, I think this is a LinkedIn leader that did this with their group. They sent them a recipe of her famous like apple pie, and then she also sent all of the ingredients to their houses. And then they did the whole cooking together on video. And I just thought that was so brilliant. I was like, what an awesome way to team build, right? And so we just have to get out and be a little more creative with this. But you can build teams and do it remotely. What do you think, Rich?
I like that. I say to somebody wrote in here from Fernando, virtual ice cream socials. There's some really interesting things, and once again, this requires a little mindset shift. So there's an activity that has been done with groups that's called levitation sticks and so forth, and the challenge is a group of people has to lower a tent pole or a PVC pipe. And so we think that has to be done, obviously, face-to-face because people have to be there, but there are ways of doing it online, and I just happened to see this a few weeks ago, and I was actually fascinated by it because the same dynamic happened with people being virtual as it happened when people were together. They ran into the same kinds of challenges. It kept going up versus down, lots of communication stuff. So I think there are things like that as well, in addition to the more social things. Also finding, to your point, Erica, that I have a client organization where people tend to like to work on their own, and all of them are showing up for these coffee hours in the afternoon. Some of them are happy hours, some are social, and they're surprised internally by how many folks are showing up who definitely don't show up when they're with people all the time. So I do think people are feeling a need for some connection out there.
Great. Here's another question. Georgette is asking, how should new employees navigate being on remote teams?
That's an interesting one. So I guess I have two thoughts. First off, as the leader of somebody coming on with somebody coming on, it really falls on that leader to make sure that that person is integrated as much as possible. And so there's a start of finding out what that employee needs, how they tend to work, what their preferences are. But then as the employee themselves, they're probably going to have to be far more proactive and actually get out there a bit more and be seen a bit more in terms of getting to know the other people and finding the right balance of speaking up and getting noticed. I don't know, Erica, what do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and I would add to it, this is where that relationship building is going to be really important. Just like if they were in person, how are they able to connect with their team members? So not only understanding the processes and, rules, regulations, or whatever of your organization, but just knowing who I'm working with. So having those virtual team meetings where maybe I saw someone posted, and I've done this before with leaders, what's something that's important to you? Show a photo, right, and talk about that photo, or make a list of 5 words that describe who you are. Like certain things like that to get to know them and help them feel connected with the team are going to be really key right now.
For some of you may be familiar with some of our card decks, and one is the Experience Explorer, Boundary Explorer. Basically, there are ways of working with a team, and these are online, that you can actually introduce yourself to a new team, or bring, as a leader, new people on by having them select cards and talk about their experiences in teams.
Thank you. We've got a question here about, do you have tips on motivating and improving productivity remotely?
Right, motivating and improving productivity remotely. So these are good questions, you guys, and I'm glad that we're thinking along these lines. It depends on what, again, you have to think individually, and the reason I paused with that is we're not doing blanket things of motivation. What motivates one's not going to motivate another, especially in the circumstances right now. So just being clear, open communication, setting expectations, finding out what's interesting and what's keeping them, what will keep or help that person be motivated. Maybe they're not motivated because they're really having a challenging time on the personal side at home. And so inspirational talk alone is not going to handle that, right? And so just uncovering what could be hiding that would be key, but also letting them know and checking in that they're doing a good job. Sometimes it can feel like you're on an island by yourself out here just through the screen. So and kudos sent by email or even posted online would be great. Do you have any suggestions, Rich?
Yeah, I go back to your comment earlier about the leader who sent the apple pie recipe. I think it was I who said apple pie. And doing things like that, as well as really spending the time. And this is going to be a challenge for a lot of us about that task and relationship. You are probably needing to spend more relationship time with some of these folks early on in this process for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is that people are, between the pandemic and between the economy and what they hear and read and news, they are needing more information and just a little bit more, I hate to say hand-holding because that sounds a little pejorative, but they need a little more TLC.
Great. We have reached the end of our time here. Thank you, Erica and Rich, for sharing the best practices of virtual leadership, and I appreciate you taking the time today. Tomorrow, everyone who attended the webinar will receive a follow-up email with links to the webinar recording and relevant articles on managing virtual teams, as well as leadership resources in times of crisis. These resources are also available to download in your webinar resources. As you exit the webinar, we hope you'll take a moment to complete the evaluation we'll push out to you so we can continue to make these webinar events worth your time. Again, thank you, Rich and Erica. And again, our audience, we look forward to your attendance at a future webinar, and stay safe.
Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you so much.
Erica. And thank you, everybody. Appreciate the great questions.
Thank
and good
you.
luck.
Yes, good luck.